Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are opening the archives today on a really fascinating historical idea, sort of centered on this core insight. Empires rise with power, but they endure with principle.
That's a powerful statement, isn't it? It challenges how we usually think about history. We often jump to, big armies or better weapons.
Right. Pure force.
Exactly. But the sources we're looking at today, they suggest something deeper. They really get into how things like organization, discipline, even strategic ethics and core values were the actual bedrock for some of history's most successful military powers.
And we're focusing specifically on key Muslim empires, right? Stretching from, Jerusalem all the way to Delhi.
Precisely. It's a huge sweep of history and geography.
So our mission today is a proper deep dive into let's call it the military excellence across four major historical powers. The Ayyubids, the Mamluks, the Ottomans, and the Mughals.
And we're not just listing battles.
No, definitely not. We're trying to dissect their, operating systems. We're hunting for that common thread, that recurring institutional law of success that let them not just win, but maintain this unbroken chain of military professionalism for centuries.
The idea is to give you, the listener, some shortcuts. Those aha moments that explain how they actually pulled it off. We want to pull out the specific strategies, the management systems, things like merit-based promotion, advanced logistics, unified command, that let them consistently achieve, quality over quantity.
Quality over quantity, that's a recurring theme.
Yeah.
And maintaining that edge, that professionalism for hundreds of years.
Yeah, it's about reverse engineering the blueprints for, lasting geopolitical success. That's the goal.
Okay, let's start unpacking this history then. We're looking beyond the initial sort of explosive early Islamic conquests and focusing on what the sources call the second wave of institutionalized excellence.
That's right. And it's important to stress these aren't one single empire evolving. They are four distinct strategic cultures, often separated by centuries and vast distances.
So you got the Ayyubids, Levant, and Egypt, 12th century.
Then the Mamluks, who followed them, based mainly in Egypt and Syria. Then the Ottomans, this huge land and sea power across Europe, Asia, Africa.
And finally, the Mughals, building that massive, sophisticated empire in the Indian subcontinent.
Very different contexts. But despite all that, the source material we've reviewed finds this shared, persistent, strategic philosophy running through them.
And that's this law of success you mentioned. If we boil down their strategic DNA, what are the absolute non-negotiables, the core rules?
Yeah, they're almost philosophical principles, but they became hard military doctrine. First, the sources hammer home quality over quantity, meaning a constant institutional focus on elite training, better weapons, rapid innovation, making sure a smaller, well-drilled force could consistently beat a larger, maybe less organized one.
Okay, quality over quantity. What's next?
Second, leadership over luxury. This is critical. Commanders were held to really high ethical and disciplinary standards. The idea was to prevent the kind of corruption and complacency that often destroys hereditary aristocracies,
So leadership wasn't about kicking back and enjoying the spoils. It was about embodying the army's principles.
Exactly right. And the third one flows from that. Discipline over decadence. Think of it as the empire's immune system.
Okay.
As wealth and success grew, which it inevitably did, this principle was meant to ensure the military didn't get soft. It had to stay sharp, professional, resistant to, internal rot. That commitment to rigor is what gave them their staying power.
This really suggests their success wasn't just luck or a couple of brilliant generals showing up at the right time.
Not at all.
It was about building a strategic culture that was designed to last, to resist decay. It's like the difference between, a flash flood and building a dam.
That's a good analogy. And that institutional commitment, that deep-seated professionalism, that's what let these powers shape global events for, nearly 8 centuries?
It's incredible.
So it really demands that we start tracing this chain right at the beginning of this second wave. And the leader who perhaps best fused that moral principle with strategic genius has to be Saladin. Al-Adin Ayyubi.
Saladin, right. The Lion of Jerusalem. He's our first major benchmark for these principles we're tracking. When we look at the Ayyubid era, his big achievement wasn't just winning battles, was it? The sources frame it as achieving strategic unity.
And achieving that unity was, frankly, a messy, difficult political job. The Near East at that time was incredibly fractured.
Right. It wasn't one big happy family.
Far from it. Before Saladin really consolidated power, you had all these local Muslim rulers, the Zengids up in Mosul and Aleppo, various emirs, the fairly unstable Fatimid Caliphate down in Egypt. Saladin's genius was realizing that this division was the Crusaders' biggest advantage.
So his first big campaign wasn't really against the Crusaders themselves, but against his Muslim rivals. How did he manage that without just triggering constant civil war? That sounds tricky.
It was very tricky. He used a mix of tactics, sometimes firm military pressure, yeah, when needed, but also a lot of shrewd diplomacy, political marriages, things like that. Crucially, he built legitimacy not just through force, but by projecting this higher unifying purpose covering Jerusalem, Al-Quds.
The bigger goal.
Exactly. He offered rivals amnesty, respected local customs, if they agreed to join a unified military command for that larger objective. That's how he gathered the organizational muscle he needed.
Which brings us to 1187, the victory at Jerusalem. The sources really stress that this victory was built on that unified purpose, resting on two pillars, faith and organization.
Right. The organization part was the practical stuff, the supply chains, unified command, getting rival factions to actually fight together effectively.
And then there's this other fascinating angle you mentioned, his moral leadership, acting as a form of psychological warfare. We usually think about discipline in battle, but Saladin showed incredible discipline after the victory.
This is where it gets really interesting strategically. So after taking Jerusalem, unlike the Crusaders decades earlier who massacred the inhabitants, Saladin showed remarkable restraint.
He famously forgave his enemies, right? Offered safe passage, ransomed the poor very cheaply.
Yes. Now think about the strategic effect of that. How does that play out militarily?
Well, it certainly paints a different picture of him compared to his opponents.
It creates an image of overwhelming power, yes, but power anchored by moral superiority. When the Crusaders saw Saladin maintaining discipline and honor even in his moment of absolute triumph, it must have had a huge psychological impact. It potentially undermined their will to fight on, knowing they faced not just a strong opponent, but one with superior ethical control.
So defeating them not just on the battlefield, but by projecting this superior discipline and honor. That act of restraint, it becomes a weapon in itself, a force multiplier.
Precisely. The source material argues this directly. It proves the idea that spiritual ethics multiply strategic power. Saladin's conduct basically gave his defeated enemies a way out, a strategic off-ramp. Instead of guaranteeing endless resistance through brutality, he encouraged stability, maybe even grudging acceptance.
Wow. So that unity he forged to take Jerusalem becomes the first clear historical example of these principles: disciplined, value-driven power in action.
Exactly. He sets the standard.
Okay, Saladin sets that standard for leadership and unity. But if we fast forward, that principle of merit and competence gets tested like never before. Now we're with the Mamluks, and they're facing an entirely new kind of threat, the Mongols.
Right, and this brings us straight to the Battle of Ain Jalut in 1260 CE. This is just a classic case study in how meritocracy can literally save a civilization from annihilation.
We need to paint the picture here, the Mongol war machine at this point.
Oh.
It was terrifying, wasn't it? They just sacked Baghdad in 1258.
Sacked it. They essentially wiped it off the map as the center of the Islamic world. They were sweeping west, and their reputation was one of, well, utter invincibility.
Unstoppable.
Pretty much. Hulagu Khan's army was brutal, efficient, and used terror systematically as a weapon. Before Ain Jalut, the idea that anyone could actually stop them seemed, frankly, impossible. The Mamluks in Egypt were really the last major military power left standing between the Mongols and North Africa.
And what makes the Mamluk story so powerful and their victory so significant is who their leaders were. Figures like Qutuz and Baybars.
Their backgrounds are the absolute core of the argument about meritocracy here. The Mamluk system itself meant these leaders were Mamluks, literally meaning owned. They were military slaves, often Turkic or Circassian boys bought or captured from regions outside the core Islamic lands.
Right, imported specifically for military service.
Exactly. Trained relentlessly from a young age. Martial arts, strategy, administration, discipline.
So this system meant they had zero hereditary claim to power. No ties to the local Egyptian or Syrian nobles, no tribal baggage.
None. Their loyalty was meant to be solely to the Mamluk institution, the state, the sultan who owned them, initially at least. It sounds harsh, but it created a pure military meritocracy designed specifically to filter out incompetence based on birthright.
That's revolutionary for the time.
It really was.
Yeah.
And the source material is very direct about this. Their success proves that true leadership is earned by competence, not birth or wealth. Because they had no automatic right to rule, their advancement depended entirely on their skills, their performance in training, and on the battlefield. This relentless performance-based system ensured that when the ultimate threat arrived, the Mongols, the absolute best military minds available, Qatus and Baybars, were actually in charge.
Okay, so you had these highly competent, merit-selected leaders facing the seemingly unbeatable Mongols in 1260. What did they actually do at Angelut? What were the battlefield innovations that finally broke that Mongol tide?
Well, the Mamluks showed that faith and motivation, while crucial, need to be paired with, the cold, hard science of war. The tactics were brilliant. They understood the Mongol way of war.
Which was?
Rapid movement, feigned retreats to lure enemies into traps, devastating mounted archery from dispersed formations. Qatus and Baybars fought fire with fire, using calculated deception masterfully.
How did that work on the day?
They used a classic tactic, but executed perfectly, the feigned retreat. Baybars led a smaller Mamluk force forward to engage the Mongol vanguard. After some fighting, Baybars' troops pretended to break and flee.
Luring the Mongols in.
Precisely. Luring the aggressive Mongol cavalry, who thought they had them on the run, deeper into a specific location, a valley near the spring of Angelut, Goliath Spring. The terrain there was deliberately chosen.
Ah, so exploiting the landscape. Drawing the Mongols into a bottleneck or difficult ground where their speed and flexibility were neutralized.
Exactly right. Once the Mongols were fully committed, likely disordered, and packed into this less favorable terrain, the main Mamluk force under Qatus, which had been hidden in the surrounding hills and forests, burst out.
The track spring.
It springs with a devastating heavy cavalry countercharge. The Mamluk heavy cavalry was superb. This combination strategic deception, using the terrain, and then a perfectly timed, highly disciplined, heavy counterattack, it completely shattered the Mongol formation.
A total tactical victory. And the Mongols' first major, undeniable defeat in their westward push.
It wasn't just a local victory. It saved Egypt, arguably halted the Mongol advance into Africa, and fundamentally shifted the geopolitical landscape. It sent ripples across the world.
So the Mamluk lesson is profound. Competence, drilled in through a rigorous meritocratic system, is the ultimate defense against even the most terrifying threats.
Absolutely. And that core idea, institutionalizing meritocracy, takes us directly to the next great power we need to look at, the Ottomans. They took these concepts of elite training and systems design and scaled them up to an imperial level lasting for centuries.
The Ottoman Empire, yeah. Incredible longevity, ruling a vast, diverse territory from the late Middle Ages into the 20th century. Their military success relied heavily on specific institutions, didn't it? We had to talk about the Janissaries.
The Janissaries, yes. They were the elite core, the operational backbone of the Ottoman army for a very long time. But to really grasp their effectiveness, you have to understand how they were recruited. Through the Devshirme system.
The blood tax, or child levy, this was controversial, certainly, but strategically very effective. Taking young boys, often Christian, from families across the Balkans and Anatolia.
Right. Removing them entirely from their birth families, their local loyalties. They were brought to the capital, converted to Islam, educated, given intense military training, and instilled with absolute loyalty to the Sultan and the Janissary Corps itself. Crucially, like the Mamluks in a way, they had no connection to the existing Turkish nobility or powerful regional families.
It sounds like a similar principle to the Mamluks creating a loyal, detribalized force, but institutionalized on an empire-wide scale.
It was, and it gave the Sultan a powerful tool, a counterweight to other forces in the empire. You had the regional Sipahi cavalry, who were often tied to land grants and local interests, but the Janissaries were salaried professionals, disciplined, reporting directly up the chain, focused solely on military efficiency. And again, like the Mamluks, the system, at least in its prime, emphasized merit-based promotion.
You rose through demonstrated skill and loyalty, not because of who your father was.
Ideally, yes. That institutional design, when it worked well, ensured high operational efficiency for generations. The best leaders, in theory, regardless of their origin, could rise to command.
So if the Mamluks showcased meritocracy and leadership, The Ottomans combined that meritocratic element, particularly in the Janissaries, with a real embrace of technological innovation. They weren't afraid to shake things up.
Absolutely. The sources really emphasize the artillery revolution they spearheaded. The prime example, of course, is the conquest of Constantinople in 1453. Sultan Mehmed II knew the ancient Theodosian walls were legendary, built to withstand older siege tech.
So he needed something new, something bigger.
Something much bigger. He employed specialized engineers, like Orban, to create massive cannons.
These are the famous mega cannons the source material mentions, like weapons that were incredibly difficult just to build and move.
Exactly. Huge bronze cannons, like the Basilica, firing massive stone balls weighing hundreds of pounds. This wasn't just adopting a new gadget, it was a massive undertaking, integrating heavy industry and complex logistics into a strategic goal. It really marked a shift from medieval siege warfare to the era where artillery became king.
And this technological edge wasn't just on land, was it?
No, not at all. Their development of naval power was just as critical. The source specifically highlights the fleet built up under commanders like the famous Khayr al-Din Barbarossa Pasha.
Barbarossa, right.
He and others transformed the Ottoman Navy into a dominant force in the Mediterranean for a significant period. This sea power wasn't just for fighting. It controlled vital trade routes, allowed them to project power across North Africa, the Balkans, the Levant, and secured the flow of wealth needed to pay for that large professional standing army, including the Janissaries.
Okay, so you've got top-tier elite troops, cutting-edge technology on land and sea. But sheer military might often burns itself out, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The Ottomans lasted for centuries. The sources point to something called the administrative military balance. What does that mean?
This gets to the heart of their sustainability. It's a deep insight. The core lesson seems to be that technology and force, however overwhelming, only really work long-term if they're anchored in values and effective administration.
Values like?
For the Ottomans, the sources suggest this powerful military discipline was balanced by a system of law and perceived justice, at least ideally. The Qanun, the Sultanic law, alongside Islamic law, provided a framework.
How does justice help stabilize a constantly expanding military empire?
Legitimacy. It builds internal cohesion. When soldiers and commanders, especially those recruited from diverse backgrounds like the Janissaries, believe the system is broadly fair, meritocratic, and respects certain rights and rules, it fosters long-term loyalty and motivation. It prevents the internal fractures and decay that can happen when power becomes arbitrary or purely coercive.
So this administrative military balance acted as a stabilizer, ensuring that the massive military machine didn't just consume the state from within.
Exactly. It linked military power to administrative structures and a sense of order. That combination allowed the system to function, expand, and adapt for over 6 centuries.
That focus on standardized administration and institutional discipline provides a perfect bridge eastward, doesn't it? Into the Mughal Empire in India, where organization itself seems to have been raised to a high strategic art.
Absolutely. The Mughals faced the immense challenge of ruling a vast, incredibly diverse subcontinent. The logistics alone were staggering. They understood, perhaps better than anyone, that military success on that scale depended less on individual battlefield brilliance, though they had that too, and more on a robust, standardized, efficient organizational machine that integrated the military deep into the state structure.
And the ultimate expression of that organizational genius was the Mansabdari system.
The Mansabdari system, yes. It wasn't just a military rank. It was the core bureaucratic framework for both military and civil administration, especially perfected under emperors like Akbar. It assigned a rank, a mansab, to essentially all imperial officers.
And this rank wasn't just a title, was it? The source stresses it involved specific duties and pay structures.
Oh, absolutely. It was highly structured. Each Mansabdar rank holder had 2 key numbers assigned to them, Zat and Sawar.
Zat and Sawar. Okay, break those down.
The Zat rank determined the officer's personal status, his place in the court hierarchy, and crucially, his personal salary. The Sawar rank, the cavalry rank, dictated the exact number of fully equipped cavalrymen and their horses that the officer was required to maintain, train, and present for regular imperial inspection.
Ah, so your personal status and pay, Zat, reflected your overall standing and record, but your direct military contribution and responsibility was measured by the number of quality troops, Sawar, you provided. That sounds like a built-in accountability mechanism.
It was exactly that, a feedback loop. To fund these contingents, mansabdars were often granted temporary land assignments called jagirs, from which they collected revenue, so they were tax administrators and military commanders. If they failed inspections, didn't maintain the required number or quality of troops for their sawar rank, they could lose their mansab, their jagir, their income.
So the system incentivized competence and performance right down the line.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about having troops, but having effective troops.
Precisely. Quality control was decentralized in terms of maintenance, but centrally mandated and inspected. It integrated the military structure into the revenue and administrative fabric of the empire.
And this level of detailed organization must have been what enabled their incredible logistical mastery, moving huge armies across India. That's no small feat.
The scale is hard to grasp. We're talking potentially hundreds of thousands of soldiers, plus camp followers, tens of thousands of animals, horses, elephants, oxen supply wagons. Managing that required phenomenal integrated logistics, and the Mughals excelled at it.
How so?
They developed sophisticated systems for managing supply routes, organizing vast mobile markets that moved with the army, ensuring fodder for animals, maintaining arsenals, coordinating movement across incredibly varied terrain, deserts, mountains, river valleys. They understood deeply that logistics is strategy. An army marches on its stomach, right? A logistical failure could doom a campaign before battle was even joined.
Looking at their army structure itself, it wasn't just about cavalry funded by mansabdars, was it? They seem to have perfected the combined arms approach.
Yes, absolutely. They orchestrated a very complex military machine. You had heavy artillery, often strategically positioned and protected by infantry. You had war elephants, not just for shock value, though that was part of it, but as mobile fighting platforms, battering rams, and for hauling heavy equipment.
Elephants, artillery.
What else?
Specialized infantry units, adapted for different roles and terrains, and of course the cavalry ranging from heavy armored lancers to swift horse archers whose quality was directly linked back to that mansabdari system.
So the real trick was making all these different parts, artillery, elephants, infantry, cavalry, work together effectively on the battlefield, often on a massive scale.
Exactly. And coordinating that kind of complex combined arms force required the centralized planning and administrative control that the mansabdari system provided. It all ties back together.
Which leads us directly to the big takeaway from the Mughal experience, as the source puts it. Administration is strategy in disguise. That's the essence of it. Enduring military power isn't just about battles. It's about the system that builds, sustains, supplies, and manages the forces. Meritocratic organization, bureaucratic efficiency, logistical prowess. These aren't boring details. They are the absolute foundation of lasting military strength. And conversely, when that administration weakened, when mansabs became inherited titles rather than earned ranks based on performance, the military effectiveness inevitably declined.
Okay, this has been an incredibly rich tour through 4 distinct, powerful civilizations: Ayyubids, Mamluks, Ottomans, Mughals. Different places, different times, yet, as you've shown, operating under these strikingly similar core principles of structure, merit, and values. Let's try to synthesize this now. Zoom out. What are the 5 key recurring foundational factors that the source material identifies as linking them all?
Right. This synthesis is where the analysis really crystallizes. By looking at the patterns across all 4, their rise, their peak effectiveness, and sometimes their decline, the authors distill these 5 factors that seem essential for building and maintaining that kind of enduring power. They're like the architectural pillars.
Okay, pillar number 1. Let's start with the motivation, the glue holding things together.
Factor 1. Faith-based motivation. This provided the crucial moral cohesion. It wasn't just about personal belief. It offered a shared identity, a sense of higher purpose, and critically, the political legitimacy needed for leaders like Saladin to unite disparate groups, or for the Mamluks to find the resolve to face the Mongols. It gave people a reason to fight beyond just pay or plunder.
Makes sense. Okay, factor 2.
Merit and discipline. We saw this loud and clear with the Mamluks, the Janissaries, the Mansabdari system. This is the engine of operational efficiency. It's the commitment to ensuring that competence, training, and discipline, not birthright or connections, determine leadership and effectiveness on the ground.
Factor 3.
Innovation with values. The Ottomans mastering artillery is the prime example. You have to embrace new technology, new tactics, constantly adapt. And this is key, that innovation needs to be integrated responsibly, anchored within a value system and administrative structure that prevents it from becoming destabilizing or purely destructive. That's how you achieve sustainable advantage, not just a temporary edge.
Okay, that makes sense. Technology isn't enough on its own. Factor 4.
Unity under purpose. We saw this with Saladin unifying factions for Jerusalem and the Mughal system coordinating diverse forces across a vast empire. Disunity, internal rivalry, these are self-inflicted wounds for any major power. Achieving and maintaining unity, focused on a clear strategic objective, was the absolute bedrock of political stability and military effectiveness.
And the final pillar, Factor 5.
Justice and command. This reflects the Ottoman administrative balance and the underlying principles of the Mansabdari system when it worked well. It's about accountability, fairness, and the rule of law within the military and administrative structure. This builds the legitimacy of power. Power that's seen as broadly just and meritocratic, even by those under its authority, is far more stable and enduring than power based solely on fear or force.
Wow. So these 5 factors, moral cohesion, operational efficiency, sustainable advantage, political stability, and legitimacy of power taken together, they really form a kind of blueprint for high-performing, long-lasting organizations, specifically military ones in this case.
Exactly. They explain not just how these empires won, but why they managed to sustain success across centuries, adapting to different challenges and technologies.
It seems like they're almost systemic defenses against the usual problems that plague empires: corruption, complacency, infighting.
That's a great way to put it. Defenses against entropy. And when you look at the eventual decline of these powers, the sources often trace it back to the erosion of one or more of these very factors. Discipline weakens, merit gets replaced by nepotism, innovation stalls, unity frays. The system starts to break down from within.
Now, this brings us to the final and perhaps most pointed part of the source material we looked at. The work itself, the nuclear umbrella, doesn't just stop at historical analysis, does it? It explicitly connects these 5 historical principles to a very contemporary geopolitical idea.
That's right. This is where the analysis shifts gears from historical description to, well, a strategic prescription for the present day. The source takes these 5 factors we just discussed: moral cohesion, operational efficiency, sustainable advantage, political stability, and legitimacy, and presents them as the essential foundation for a proposed Pakistan-led Muslim defense alliance in the 21st century.
Okay, before we get into the specifics of that modern proposal, I think it's really important we reiterate our role here for the listener. At the deep dive, we analyze and present the ideas found in our source materials. We're not endorsing any particular political stance or geopolitical vision ourselves.
Absolutely crucial. We're reporting on the arguments made by the authors of this specific source, allowing you, the listener, to evaluate their claims and the historical parallels they draw.
So the source uses this deep historical dive, the successes of the Ayyubids, Mamluks, Ottomans, Mughals, as a kind of historical justification or framework for thinking about modern defense cooperation. And it makes a very specific modern comparison, calling it an echo of the past.
It does, a direct, tangible reference. The source explicitly points to the 2025 Pakistan-Saudi Defense Pact.
And how does it frame that pact?
It frames it as the first modern echo of Ain Jalut.
Wow, okay. That's drawing a direct line back to the Mamluks defeating the Mongols. Ain Jalut, as we discussed, was about unity born out of sheer necessity, facing down what seemed like an unstoppable existential threat.
Exactly, and the source interprets this contemporary Pakistan-Saudi agreement in that same light as a strategic coming together, driven by necessity, aimed at security integration and collective defense in the face of today's complex threats.
So the argument is, this modern cooperation shouldn't be seen as just a temporary deal, but potentially the start of rebuilding that historical architecture of success.
Yeah.
Using those 5 factors as the guide.
That's the core argument. It suggests that modern military assets, even nuclear capabilities mentioned in the title, The Nuclear Umbrella, are ultimately fragile unless they're supported by that deeper institutional integrity the unity Saladin built, the meritocracy the Mamluks embodied, the innovation the Ottomans mastered, the organization the Mughals perfected, and the underlying justice needed for legitimacy.
So the overarching message connecting Saladin right through to this modern context remained consistent. Lasting power, the kind that endures and shapes history, requires quality, unity, and values built right into the systems of defense and governance.
Yes. It's presenting a vision of power not as something you just grab, but as a structure you have to build carefully, using proven principles of ethical, administrative, and strategic integrity.
This deep dive has certainly shown that the remarkable success of these historical military powers wasn't accidental. It wasn't just about numbers or terrain. It was systemic, it was value-driven, and it relied on repeatable institutional designs, from the Mamluk merit system to Mughal logistics. And the source clearly argues these aren't just historical curiosities, they're potentially relevant blueprints.
Understanding that architecture, understanding how it worked, and also how it failed when those core principles eroded. That's the critical takeaway for anyone thinking about state power and longevity today.
Indeed. Which leads us to the final, provocative thought the source material leaves us with, building directly on everything we've explored today. It asks the reader to consider this. The task now is not to mourn the past, but to build its architecture again, with Pakistan as its strategic heart.
A challenging thought, definitely. Something to really reflect on how these deep historical patterns of military and organizational excellence might inform or influence modern alliances and strategic thinking on the world stage today.
A truly detailed and, I think, thought-provoking journey through centuries of military professionalism. Thank you so much for guiding us through these complex strategic cultures.
My pleasure. It's always fascinating to unpack the mechanics behind such enduring historical success.
We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.